Here is a fresh, 10-minute documentary script for corporate crimes, focusing on a scandal that manipulated physical markets, the hidden war over aluminum prices. Title: The Aluminum Heist, How Banks Made You Pay $5 Extra for a Soda. Description: For over a decade, Wall Street banks secretly manipulated the price of every beer can, laptop case, and airplane you ever used. They didn't hack a computer or forge a signature. They simply moved metal in circles. This is the story of the secret warehouse scheme that added billions to the global economy. Tags: corporate crime, white-collar crime, commodity manipulation, aluminum, Wall Street. Script: Imagine you walk into a gas station. You grab a can of soda. You pay $2, but hidden in that price is a secret surcharge, about 5 cents, that has nothing to do with sugar, carbonation, or transportation. It is a tax paid to Wall Street, a tax hidden in the aluminum, a scheme so brazen, so cynical, that in 2013, it forced the United States Senate to hold hearings. A scheme where banks didn't steal money, they stole time. This is the story of the Great Aluminum Squeeze. Not a story about derivatives or mortgages, but about physical metal sitting in warehouses in Detroit. For years, two of the largest banks in the world, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase, owned these warehouses, and they used a bizarre, almost absurd tactic to drive up the price of aluminum across the globe. They made the wait time to get the metal out of their warehouses incredibly, impossibly long. Why would a bank want to hold up a shipment of aluminum? Because every day that metal sat in their warehouse, it generated rent. And more importantly, the artificial scarcity kept global prices high. This wasn't a crime of violence, it was a crime of logistics. Let's start in the year 2010. The financial crisis is over. Interest rates are near zero. Banks are desperate for yield. Goldman Sachs buys a company called Metro International Trade Services for a reported $550 million. Metro didn't trade software or make loans. They owned metal warehouses, mostly in Detroit. Now, Detroit was a perfect location. It was a delivery point for the London Metal Exchange, the LME, which sets the global benchmark for aluminum prices. Here's the trick. The LME had a rule. If a buyer wanted to take their metal out of a warehouse, the warehouse had to ship out a minimum amount each day. But the rule also allowed the warehouse to set its own internal queue. So, Goldman's Metro International simply made the process incredibly slow. They offered other warehouse owners crazy deals to store metal in their sheds. They paid bribes in the form of rent incentives to bring metal in. Then, when a buyer wanted to take delivery, say a company like Coca-Cola or Miller Coors, needing to make cans, they were told, "Sorry, there are 18,000 people ahead of you. You'll get your aluminum in about 2 years." This is known in the industry as merry-go-rounding. Metal would be loaded from one warehouse, driven a few blocks down the street to another warehouse owned by the same bank, and unloaded again. The metal never really left Detroit, it just generated a new queue. By 2013, the wait time to get aluminum out of these Detroit warehouses had ballooned to 18 months. Why did this matter to you? Because the price of aluminum isn't just the LME spot price. There is a physical premium. If you can't get the metal, you pay extra to force the queue. This premium skyrocketed. In 2010, the premium was around 4 cents per pound. By 2013, it was over 20 cents per pound. That's a 400% increase. The aluminum industry was paying an extra $3 billion a year just to get their own material. The victims were everywhere. Anheuser-Busch, the beer company, said they were paying an extra $400 million a year for cans. Boeing complained about the cost of aluminum for airplanes. Car manufacturers saw their costs spike. And of course, that cost was passed down to you. A study by the consumer advocacy group, Americans for Tax Reform, estimated that the scheme was costing U.S. consumers an extra $5 billion a year in everything from soda to lawn chairs to auto parts. The scheme was legal, but was it ethical? The banks argued they were just providing a service. They said the long queues were a sign of demand, not manipulation. But the math didn't lie. An internal email from a Goldman Sachs employee leaked during a Senate investigation. It revealed exactly how the system worked. One trader wrote, "We are creating a bottleneck." Another noted that the goal was to collect warehousing rent, which is more valuable than the metal itself. The scandal broke wide open in July 2013 when a Bloomberg Markets reporter, David Kochanisky, published a deep-dive article. The headline was, "The Secret World of Wall Street's Aluminum Racket." The public was outraged. Senators Sherrod Brown and Carl Levin launched an investigation. They called the heads of Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan to testify. The hearing was tense. Senator Levin held up a can of soda and asked why consumers were paying a hidden tax. The executives defended the practice, calling it a legitimate business model. But the pressure was too intense. In 2014, Goldman Sachs sold Metro International Trade Services for a profit, but the damage was done. The London Metal Exchange was forced to reform its rules. They introduced load-out rates that were tied to the size of the warehouse. They tried to force the release of metal. For a time, the premium dropped. But here's the scary part. The scheme didn't die. It just moved. Other commodity trading firms and hedge funds saw how profitable it was. The same tactics are now being used in the global nickel market, in the tin market, and in the plastic resin market. The aluminum heist wasn't a single transaction. It was a slow, systematic bleed on the world economy. It exposed a fundamental weakness in how physical commodities are priced. It showed that a bank can legally manipulate a market just by being a landlord. The scandal faded from the headlines, but the lesson remains. When a bank starts acting like a warehouse owner, you better check the queue. The next time you open a soda, look at the can. That metal cost a little more than it should have, because a banker in a suit decided that his bonus was more important than your lunch. If you want to understand the hidden mechanics of corporate greed, hit that subscribe button. We dig into the stories the headlines forget. Subscribe for more corporate crime